In the 1970s, women's history was not much more than a vague idea. Then came the great feminist marches in New York, Washington, D.C., and other cities, marking the 50th anniversary of women winning the vote, and dramatic actions like women burning their bras in Atlantic City during the Miss America pageants. There were also some scattered reports of women in labor reform, like Rosie the Riveter, and a splashy Time magazine cover. But even strong books from academia drew little notice. Only flashes, but certainly flint, for what needed to happen. Women's history and a sustained awareness of the importance of women's contributions in all areas of American life, including schools, workplaces, and government offices.
Well, my conversion experience to women's history came when I was a young social studies teacher trying to survive in the classroom, my second year of teaching, knowing that teachers need to know everything, especially social studies teachers. And it's a Friday, making my class particularly relevant on Friday. A young man raised his hand in the back of the classroom and said, "And what is the women's movement?" It's 1972. Ms. Magazine has been published. Shirley Chisholm's going to run for president. Barbara Jordan is actually going to be elected from the state of Texas, right? It's 1972. It's a banner year, the women's rights movement. And I am a social studies teacher. I look at this young man. I look at the class. I try and look as intelligent as any teacher could look. I pause and say, "What a good question." Let's divide into groups and look at that question. And so I went back to my classroom and I told those young people the truth. I said, you know, what a question, what an important question. Because unless we ask these questions, how do we change the way we see the world and most importantly, ourselves, our mothers, our foremothers? And so the rest of the semester and for many semesters after that, every time we introduced a chapter in American history, we would say, and how did this relate to women? Or how did this relate to people of different cultural groups? Because each time we asked those questions, we expanded ourselves. So I would really like to thank that student all these years later and all the students of the world who are brave enough to ask those questions.
In a 1978 history class in Santa Rosa, teacher Alice Wexler remembered, Molly McGregor took a routine class assignment, making a slideshow on the history of women in the USA, and brought these slideshows and presentations into classrooms. This was the beginning of what would transform into a brilliant 40-year grassroots project that educated and inspired thousands of girls and young women across the country and beyond. This energy and transformation started with a small group of women in Sonoma County, California, who felt the need to know about women's history themselves. This desire to know was the origin of the National Women's History Project, co-founded by Mary Ruthstadter, Betty Morgan, Maria Cuevas, Paula Hammett, and Molly Murphy McGregor. Early on, they rolled out what would be a blueprint for a national program, a mission to build and sustain awareness of multicultural women's history. It began with a day, International Women's Day, March 8, 1978. With lobbying and backing from educators and women's groups, President Carter was persuaded to declare National Women's History Week in 1980. After further work by the project and its allies, March was recognized as National Women's History Month, which is celebrated nationally every year.
We are here to celebrate Women's History Month by honoring women who make history, to celebrate the lives of women whose heroism and achievements have helped build this country. And we are commemorating the leadership of a small group of women who had the idea that women's history was worth celebrating just 20 years ago and have, with their ideas, their inspiration, their hard work, and their infectious style of leadership, created a national movement. We are here to honor the National Women's History Project.
First contacting schools and educational task forces, the project presented teachers, both women and men, with a strong curriculum that brought awareness of women's rich heritage to both students and the teachers themselves. This new knowledge, said Molly on the declaration of the first Women's History Week, was a way to make all women more self-assured, more optimistic about the power we can have over our lives, to be makers of history and active participants in our society. She set the tone and overall purpose of their work. the realization that women were winners and leaders in so many areas of society. The National Women's History Project created not only curricula, but also posters and materials designed to go into everyday spaces, living rooms and classrooms, boardrooms and offices, barracks, meeting rooms, city halls, and even police and fire stations. Women's images started appearing as never before. The History Project fostered community events and also encouraged state and local representatives to proclaim March as Women's History Month. Public libraries and bookstores worked up displays of women's literature and highlighted the few books that existed on women's history. The project worked in collaboration with other groups like the Girl Scouts, Business and Professional Women, and the League of Women Voters to sponsor essay contests, new research, and events tied to women's history. During the first decades, the project distributed up to 300,000 catalogs annually and employed a staff of 7. State and federal agencies made grants for curricula that totaled over $500,000 as the work was so new and just being recognized. The project gained validity, and its vision, the need for broadcasting women's place in our nation, was recognized, and over the years a movement was created. Gradually, women, along with their history and achievements, started to seep into the mainstream of American life. The project turned unknown women trailblazers into household names. It led women to make Women's History Month a community event, and eventually turned scattered observances into a national celebration. After 38 years, the National Women's History Project became the National Women's History Alliance, reflecting the heightened interest and new organizations that have grown up to help Americans learn more about women's history. The project has gathered together, distributed, and often produced publications, books, gazettes, and films throughout its 41 years. It has led celebrations of the women's suffrage movement for over 25 years and is promoting Women's Equality Day as a national holiday. Each year, the Alliance chooses an inspiring theme for Women's History Month, which is used widely by federal, state, and local governments and groups of all sorts. Throughout the year, thousands call the Alliance's office for research and help and visit the website for resources and information. The National Women's History Alliance has named women honorees, both alive and deceased, every year, and many events have been held in Washington, D.C. This event, along with publications about these honorees, brings these women out of the shadows and quite deliberately writes them back into history.
We need Women's History Month
so we can remember all of the strong,
unbreakable, empowering,
disrupting women who play a vital role in history.
We need to acknowledge the women, the relentless pioneers who didn't back down in a room full of men and taught us
how to stand up for myself.
Oh, perseverance. We are capable of accomplishing absolutely anything. How to fight back and how to not give up on the fight.
We've seen one of the grandest celebrations of all, the centennial of women winning the right to vote. Here again, the Alliance led planning efforts, supported special projects, networked extensively, and offered grassroots leadership to the many groups and individuals commemorating this historic anniversary. Starting in the 1970s, Molly and the National Women's History Alliance showed women and girls not only that they had a history far more diverse and complex than the textbooks taught, but also that they were a part of history. And most importantly, that they could make history. Come join us as we continue to discover and tell women's stories.